Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
That's right. It's that time of the week. Another episode of Cash Plays. It is Tuesday, April 21st, and I am your host, Bart Hanson. As always, you can email me at cashplays@pokerroad.com. I depend on the emails. And today we're going to get into a lot of emails. I've kind of been neglecting some questions that have been sent over the last few weeks because of the guests that we've had on, but it's just going to be me today. So I'll be getting to a lot of, some concepts have been brought up in the emails. You can also send a voicemail at 877-836-ROAD. 877-836-ROAD. We're going to be going to a guy from Brazil today that actually sent a voicemail in. And again, you can check out my radio show that I host with Nick Gieber over at worldseriesofpoker.com. We take phone calls from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time on Monday nights, and the second hour is played on Tuesday night. So check it out, worldseriesofpoker.com, and the phone number over there is 866-925-TALK. Kind of a lighthearted show, but again, check us out. Some very, very exciting news, hopefully for next week's show. Looks like I will be traveling up to Santa Barbara, California, and we will be having a conversation with Brian Townsend. I emailed Brian this week, and he seems enthusiastic about doing the show. Again, I'm going to try to do it for next week's episode. If not next week, maybe the week afterwards. But look forward to that. SB Rugby, ABBA, Brian Townsend. Definitely a guy that's probably not going to hold anything back. So, I'd like you all to email in some questions. If you have questions for him, if you want to get into any specific things you'd like me to ask of him, again, don't hesitate to email cashplays@pokerroad.com. Now, there's a concept I want to get into starting off the show before we get into some of the, the email questions. And that's a concept of way ahead, way behind. And what does way ahead, way behind mean? Well, when you're playing No Limit Hold'em, and you've made a flop continuation bet, I come from the school of thought that I think the turn is probably one of the most important streets to play in No Limit cash games. I'll give you an example. Say you raise it up with ace-jack suited, and the flop comes out jack, deuce, 3 rainbow. Guy up front checks, you make a bet, and he calls. The turn is now a 7. Well, should you bet here, or should you check? Now, I have to preface this entire segment that I'm doing here. This advice is not for the smaller capped levels. At very small capped levels, you should probably be always betting your hand for value. And again, it's tough to say. You can't do anything always. It depends. But normally, you can't really go wrong by betting your hand for value at smaller levels. But once you start moving into deeper games, you really are posed a question there on the turn. Because if you've bet the flop and now you bet the turn, what hands are going to call you on a non-draw heavy board? If the guy is a calling station, I recommend to bet for value. But, again, if you bet the turn, are you going to get a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 8s to fold? Will a guy call you with a weaker jack on both streets? A lot of the times, you are way ahead of your opponent, or you are way behind your opponent. And this goes into, the concept of pot control with one pair in deeper stack games as well. Can your hand stand a check raise on a non-draw heavy board with ace-jack there? Now, I have to tell you, I've been playing games for the last, 2, 3, 4 years, up to the 10 and a quarter, sometimes 20-40 no limit level, and it is so rare that in a live game somebody makes a move on a dry board as a check raise on the turn. Normally, at your normal 5-10 game at the bike or 10-20 game at Commerce, 99% of the time that is indicative of one pair if you get check raised and you are in position. So, there's that concept of No Limit Hold'em, and, Gabe Thaler came on Live with the Bike once and he talked about it, where if you're playing against decent players, and the pot size increases, those one pair of hands, the value of those hands decrease. You should not win a big pot with ace-jack on a jack-deuce-3 turn as a 7 board. So checking behind as a combination of pot control and to get a river call from an inferior hand is the best play a lot of the time. And you can kind of use that to your advantage as well when you don't have a hand. And you kind of play it the other way around. I'll give you an example. Say you made a raise with ace-king, and 2 people called you, and the board came out queen, deuce, deuce, and you had position. Rainbow board. It got checked to you. You're thinking, I want to bet here, maybe get the small pocket pairs out. So you make a bet. One guy folds and the other guy calls. Well, now you're thinking, well, he could have a pocket pair, but let's say the guy's loose. He could also have a deuce. It's not really a draw-heavy board. Well, now all of a sudden the turn's a king. Now, if you have ace-king here, perfect spot, the guy checks to you. If you bet, remember the flop was queen, deuce, deuce. What hands that you beat are going to call? If the guy had a queen, you were probably going to bet him off the queen. Not always. But a small pocket pair, you probably bet and get a fold. A deuce is going to probably make a check raise at some point. Check raise the turn, lead at you at the river. So do you want to check behind there, again, for a combination of pot control and also maybe to get a call from a queen? Now, in the same token, you can use that strategy in the other way. Let's say you had made that raise with 8-9 suited, had made a standard continuation bet on a dry board of queen, deuce, deuce. The guy called you. Now the turn's a king. Now he checks to you. Well, now you use that overcard as a scare card and you bet again. And again, you've got to mix up your play. People listening to this might think that they can come and, I'm going to play the hand the same way where I'm never going to bet ace-king on the turn. So if they know if I'm betting the turn, I'm actually bluffing. Well, no, I'm going to remember my line against certain opponents and not play it the same. Changing your lineup is very important. But for the most part, this is a concept, again, if you play into deeper live games, where on that turn with ace-king, you are either way, way ahead, and you do not want worse hands to fold. You want to get value from worse hands. Or you are way behind. The guy has slow played some sort of monster, and your hand really can't stand a big pot check raise. Remember, this is just with one pair of hands. Now, I was talking to a buddy of mine about this, and he's saying, well, if you're going to check the turn with a hand like ace-king in that spot, or if the board had come out, if you had ace-jack and the board had come out jack-deuce-3, and you checked a 7 on the turn, why aren't you checking top set there in that spot? If you've got 3 jacks, why are you checking the turn if you're going to get pocket 9s to fold? Well, it's an interesting question, and I had to think about it. And the reason why I'm not normally checking a monster hand there is because the value that you get by continuing to build a big pot up with a nut hand in a deeper stack game far outweighs the value that you might get by checking the turn and getting a river call with pocket 8s or pocket 9s. Remember, part of the reason why you're checking that turn with ace-jack or ace-king on that queen-deuce-deuce board is because you don't really want to build a massive pot up. Your hand is good enough to extract some value. You don't want worse hands to fold. But you don't want to be playing in a 5-10 game a $1,500 pot with one pair against a normal, decent opponent. But if you have a hand like all of a sudden a queen-deuce-deuce board, queen's full or king's full, something like that, I think that you still need to be pot building. I think you want to have the guy maybe make a move at you, or you just hope that he has something and he wants to get tricky with you. Again, normally I'm not checking monster hands on the turn. But, a hand like aces on a jack-deuce-3 rainbow. Aces is not a monster. I think it's the same thing as the ace-jack. You might check that 7 on a turn. And you make a value bet on the river. That's a good line for one pair of hands. Bet flop, check turn, bet river. Now, there are some other examples, of this type of play, and I'll give you an example of out-of-position play. Let's say that you're super deep. You're talking 400 or 500 big blinds deep, and the cutoff raises. And you re-raise with pocket aces in the big blind. And now the cutoff calls. You think the cutoff has a wide range, but not super wide. He's not super laggy. The pot comes 9 high. The flop comes out 9 high. People would say, well, I'm going to come out and bet for value, which I don't have a problem with. But what if you were to check from up front for pot control? What do you think about that line? It's something that's not always discussed. Because if a guy is called here with tens or jacks or queens, and you throw a big bet out on the flop, a lot of the time, again, against decent competition, they might just dump the hand. Or if you throw the bet out on the flop with aces, and they call, and another rag comes out on the turn, you check the turn. And then hopefully either they bet, which they, again, if they're a decent player, they're probably not going to do, they check behind. And now you bet the river for value. I saw a hand go down on Live at the Pike between Avo and Tight Kirk, if anybody remembers those two characters. It actually wasn't on Live at the Pike. It was right before the show. It was when I was playing the 5-10. And a guy had raised from up front, and Avo, who plays very, very tight, this tight Armenian guy, re-raised. And Tight Kirk called in the big blind. And we call him Tight Kirk because he was ridiculously tight. I'm talking super, super duper tight. And, once he smooth calls 3 bets, he probably has specifically one of 3 hands. Queens, kings, or aces. And actually, he wasn't even that tricky of a player. I think I put him on 2 specific hands. I put him on queens or kings. I think he wouldn't want to have a bad beat happen to him, so he would re-raise with aces. So he's got queens or kings. Avo, he knows that. He knows exactly what Tight Kirk has. Tight Kirk is playing his hand face up from out of position. And in this case, Avo had aces. And Avo has position. And the flop comes out 10 high. The pot's got about $400 in it. And I think Kirk has maybe 1,000 left in his stack. Kirk checks the flop, again on a 10 high flop. And instead of Avo betting the flop, he checks behind. And then he extracts 2 streets of value on the turn and on the river. By betting 75% pot on the turn, Kirk checked the turn again from up front. And then basically putting Kirk all in on the river. And got Kirk to call with 2 queens. Now, if Avo had bet the flop, bet flop, bet turn, or even had come out and bet the flop strong, Kirk might have folded the hand. Again, you might take a line of bet flop, check turn, bet river. That's usually a pretty good line. But combination pot control, and especially if that flop had come out with 1 paint card, that was a pretty easy. I don't think Avo was not playing pot control in that particular hand. He was just trying to get 2 streets of value from queens. And he thought that the best way to do that was to check the flop. But, say the board had come out with a jack in it, and he thought that, Avo might, in his range, might be a jack. Or even better, how about the board comes out with a queen in it? And now Avo plays it as a check flop, and now when Kirk doesn't bet the turn, he bets the turn and bets the river, and specifically puts Kirk on kings. Again, this advice is definitely, absolutely not for smaller games. If you guys are playing in games up to 5-5 no limit, up to $500 capped, please do not take my advice. Bet for value, bet for value. You're going to re-raise a guy with aces out of the blind. He's going to call with pocket nines, and he's going to stack off on a 7 high board. Do not get tricky in those games. But as you move up to deeper stacked live games, pot control, trying to extract maximum value with 1 pair versus 1 pair, becomes important. It's almost like a routine line. It reminds me of taking like ground balls in practice, in baseball practice. It's very rare that you're going to hit a grand slam and have a nut hand over a second nut hand. But extracting maximum value in these types of everyday hand situations, really is, one of the most important ways to win money overall in these games. So thinking about checking that turn with a line, think about what your opponent has. And again, if you're at these levels and the guy's a calling station, then by all means bet. If you've got ace-king and the board comes out queen, deuce, deuce with 2 clubs now, and you bet and the guy calls, and you're fairly certain he's got a club draw or a queen, or you're fairly certain he's got a club draw, and the turn comes a king, well, you can bet and easily fold to a raise. Because if he raises and he's loose passive, he's got deuces. But if he just calls, he's got clubs. So don't miss out on the value on the turn. If you think your opponent is on a draw, by all means bet the turn. Because again, it's so rare that you'll run across a guy that has the ability to check raise semi-bluff the turn. But if you think he has a weak one pair hand, definitely consider checking the turn to extract value on the river. And again, it all comes back to that concept of a lot of the time you are either way, way ahead or you're way, way behind. Want to get to an email here on another topic, and this email comes from David Palm. And he said, Bart, you've been recently talking about folding sets in deep games. Can you give us an insight as to when to fold sets in smaller capped games? Thank you for the email, David. And, I have talked about how I folded a set, I think last week or the week before, and it was incorrect. I also made a fold of a set at Commerce a couple months ago, of middle set, that was also incorrect. So I guess the moral of the story is, and again, it's tough to say always do something, but I don't really think you'll go wrong if you never fold sets in cap games. If you flop a set and you are in a capped game and you're not extraordinarily deep, don't fold. I mean, it's almost like the thing with Harrington says in tournaments where you shouldn't really be folding kings ever. It's just at those levels, it's filled with bad players that will overplay a draw. I mean, I've seen guys go all in as a snap push with the nut flush draw so many times. You sit there on the board, you flopped a set of sixes on a 7-6-3 board, with two clubs. And you make a bat or you make a check raise, and then somebody snap ships over the top of you all in. It's like, wow, well, this guy, he could have 4-5, or excuse me, let's say that you've got bottom set there. Let's make it even easier. 7-6-3. You've got a set of threes. You either make a bet and get raised, or you make a check raise and a snap 3-bet ship over the top, and you're like, wow, what do I beat here? I'm crushed against a set of sevens, set of sixes I'm crushed. I've got some equity against 4-5, but you call and the guy shows ace-10 of the flush draw suit. It just happens so many times at those lower levels. I just think that people have absolutely no idea how to value your hand, that you really should not be folding, again, really any set in a capped game. It's just, if you really know the player and you know the situation and you think it's the right laydown, by all means, but I hate to generalize. But the range of a snap ship in a capped game, I think, is exponentially more than against decent competition in a deeper live game. So I want to thank you for that email, David, but definitely take that into consideration. Got another email here from Kevin Anderton. And he says, could you give a little advice about the pitfalls of a value bluff? This is something that I use at the tables a lot, maybe too much. It seems to work more times than not. To be clear, what I mean by value bluff is a bluff on the river that's disguised as a value bet that's just a bit too big. And that comes from Kevin. That's an interesting question, Kevin. I don't necessarily know if I would call that a value bluff. I come from the school of thought, at least in the early days, where I would tend to under bluff. I would tend to make my bluff smaller because I would risk less and it would look more like a value bet at the end. And I would tend to overbet my made hands more. And again, I wonder, I haven't played at the lower levels and I'm not sure, someone can give me some feedback, but I wonder if that's still probably the right way to play. In the sense that, if you've got a monster hand and you make a big bet, somebody thinks you're bluffing. Somebody thinks you've missed. But if you make like a 40% pot bet, they think you're value betting. So they're almost more likely to fold to the smaller bet than to the bigger bet. Now, I know it's changed in the games that I've played in, where if you're making a big bet, and I've made this mistake before where I've bet just too much, you really have got to put a guy on a range of hands and figure out what he has and what he can call with. But I snapped the guy off the other day, a couple days ago, where I don't know, the pot was limped around and I had queen deuce suited in the big blind, and I think the board came out like 7-7-3 rainbow. The pot was like 40 or $50, 7-7-3 rainbow, and the turn was a queen that brought a backdoor flush draw out there. And I checked it. I had queen deuce. And this guy in position, he bet 60, which is just over the pot, and I called. and another guy called in between. So the pot was 180. The river bricked off. It was like a 3. And now the guy bets 300 on the river. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy, I don't really have respect for his game. He's not a good player. If he was trying to represent trips on the flop, why would he be making such a big bet at the end? I think he's busted out on a flush draw. So I actually tanked and check called, and my queen was good, queen rag. But it just goes to show you a little bit of, my thought process when I see a big bet come out. And I see some tight guys throw out huge bets at the end, which are sometimes bluffs. And if you just follow the action of the hand, you realize that they would never bet a made hand like that at the end. And I struggle with this concept sometimes about value betting, because I see guys that play, professionals that I respect and play on a day-to-day basis, make small value bets on the river to get paid off. And I always came from, again, kind of the line of thinking that, let's say I'm going to make a bet with a hand that I know is 100% good at the end, and the pot is $1,000. If I bet $1,000 and get called 30% of the time, I am making more money than if I bet $250 into a $1,000 pot and get called 100% of the time. The $1,000 bet has a $300 overall expectation, and the $250 bet has a $250 expectation. So that's usually the style that I take. But again, I've started to see that some of the big bets aren't getting called. So, changing up your line, is good. I never really like to over bluff like that, though. I think it's risking too much when you can make a smaller bet that seems like a value bet. And that's what I would call a value bluff. I would call a value bluff a bet that mimics a value bet, which is not normally a big bet at the end. So that's kind of my line of thinking, Kevin, and I'm not sure what types of games that you play in, but normally if you can disguise your bluffs, again, as bets that you would make maybe for value, I think that they would tend to work more. And sometimes you can sneak in those over bets, especially against calling stations. Remember, build the pot up and bet for value against calling stations. With that, we're going to take a little bit of a break, but stick around. We will be right back, right here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays. Not listening to Huff and Stapes on Two Jacks in the Hole? Here's what you're missing.
Wait, who is it? Let me answer the door. Oh, look, it's Deborah LaFave, and she's here to report herself as a registered sex offender. Awesome! Please come in. Stop by anytime you like. Can you imagine the neighborhood? She has to go door to door. Hi, I'm Deborah LaFave. I just want to let you know I'm a registered sex offender. And if you were like 17, 15, 14, you'd be like, awesome.
Yes, indeed
this is
you
the
would.
Best.
17, 15, or you were the dad of a 17 or 15-year-old. You'd be jealous.
You'd be like, oh,
wait,
man.
She only does 14-year-olds? Are you kidding me? The one sex offender that finally moves into my neighborhood and she can't even do people her own age.
Two Jacks in the Hole. Everything to do with laughs, nothing to do with poker. Only on PokerRoad.com. Cash Plays.
Welcome back, everyone. Again, if you want to leave a voicemail, 877-836-ROAD, 877-836-ROAD. Just let them know that it's for Cash Plays, and Justin Shrunk will get it over to me. We have a little bit of an international flavor here on today's show. Gentleman from Brazil wants to ask a question.
Hi, this is Kika Liu from Brazil, and I'm sending this message to Bart Hanson. And Bart, I've been listening to your show, and I've been hearing you talk about the how aggressive you play your draws. And that's what I would like to ask you. How aggressive should I play my draws? I play in a pot limit hold'em cash game here. It's a home game. Everybody pretty much knows a lot of everybody else, and it's hard to get paid when you finally hit your flush and stuff like that. So I was thinking about that, and I appreciate your help, okay? Thank you very much. Again, this is Gui Calil from Brazil, Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and I hope to see you guys here in the LAPT. Okay, bye-bye.
Well, thank you very, very much for that question. Little reference to the LAPT, Latin American Poker Tour. Sometimes you can see little tabs for satellites running, I think, on PokerStars for that. But I love this question. How aggressive do you play your draws? Because this is probably one of the most misunderstood concept, I think, in No Limit Hold'em. And, to get into it, I like to play draws in position against pre-flop raisers like a big draw. I like to take the same type of line that I would with the set. What I mean by that is, if my common line, when I flop a set against somebody who I think has an overpair, is to raise, then normally I'm going to raise the flop with my big draws. Let's say a guy raises pre-flop, and I've called with 8-7 of clubs, and the board comes out, 5-6 queen with 2 clubs. They bet and I raise. That's normally a line that I like to take. That's a line that I would take with a set of 5s, with any type of set. It really puts a lot of pressure on a deep stack, because do they want to just check and call with one pair? Do they want to build a big pot up with one pair out of position? But this is where the concept really gets misunderstood. You should be playing your draws for maximum fold equity. And if there is no fold equity, then you should not be playing your draw strong. Now, what I mean by that is, if you are 100% sure that someone will stack off with an overpair, let's say you know that they've got aces or kings. They raised it pre-flop, and you've called with 8-7 of clubs because you want to break them. You want to flop something big. And the board comes out, queen 5-6 with 2 clubs. You know that they've probably got aces or kings. They bet out here. Now, here's the issue. If you are to raise and there is absolutely no fold equity, do you want to gamble in that spot? And I think a better example is actually, let's say you have a flush draw with a gut shot. Let's say that you are under 50-50 with your draw. If there is no fold equity, is calling sometimes the best line to take? And I would argue yes. You have got to consider your position and your opponent when you are trying to make a semi-bluff raise with a draw. And I am a big advocate of playing my draws aggressively. But I'll give you another simple example, and it's normally when a pot is limped around. Sometimes it can be raised pre-flop, but again, when you are playing live, people's hands, especially the ones that are loose passive, they're so polarized. So that when you bet out on a flop with a big draw, say you've got 9-10 of clubs and the board comes out 8-7 deuce with 2 clubs. You've got overs, open-ended straight draw with a flush draw, right? You bet out, and a guy who's really, really tight, he raises you. You've got to understand that guys that play like that, in that spot, they almost always have a 2-pair plus hand, and they are always going to stack off with that hand. I got into a little bit of an argument with a buddy of mine, because he says that when my buddy said, quote unquote, when I lead into a raiser after he's raised pre-flop, I'm going to play for stacks. And, I think kind of the problem with that philosophy is that if you lead into a raiser or lead into any guy that's going to raise you and it's going to stack off, do you really want to take your draw against his hand range? And it's not so much leading into a raiser, because if you put him on a big pocket pair, I think in this case, let's say a guy, and I played a hand like this the other day where a lady raised it on the button to 40, and I called in the blind with 8-9 suited. Because I just, normally I don't call with that type of hand out of position, but I knew that she was kind of weak. I can get her off of some hands. And the board came out ace 6-7, and I had 8-9 suited. I had a backdoor flush draw with an open-ended straight draw. I said, wow, this is a really good spot for me to bet, because she has an ace. If she does not have an ace, she's just going to fold. And if she has an ace, she kind of plays weak. She might just call, or she might raise, and I can 3-bet. And that's exactly what happened. I bet into her. She kind of raised it up, and it was an easy lead 3-bet for me. And she actually ended up stacking off. She actually put all her money in because she had raised with 6-7 suited, so she had flop bottom too. But there was absolutely no way that she was going to stack there with an ace queen or an ace jack, or I think even an ace king. She's a little bit intimidated by me. So you've got to have to figure out and watch your table image. So in a spot where you flop a big draw against a preflop raiser and you're out of position and you can take the line of lead 3-betting, I think that is a really good way to maximize your fold equity. At the same time, if you're playing against a guy where you think the best way to maximize your fold equity is to check raise, then by all means, check raise. But the thing that people misunderstand is when you're playing a pot, usually again that's limped around, or you're playing a pot that's raised and you lead in to the raiser and somebody else raises in front of the raiser and that person's not that aggressive, they have a 2-pair plus hand. You look at normal competition in these live games, people that raise the flop, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, especially, it's so easy to figure out. Pick the guys that don't play their draws aggressively. If they are raising the flop, they have better than 1-pair hands. They have better than 1-pair hand, and they're going to stack off. So when you've got 9-10 of clubs and you lead into this field and this really, really tight guy raises here, he has at least 8-7, or he could have a set. And I poker stoved this stuff out before the show. If you have a 15 out draw versus a set, you are a 60-40 dog. If you're against top 2, you're 50-50. With a 12 out draw, let's say you've got a flush draw and a gut shot. A set is a 2-1 favorite over your 12 out draw. 2-pair is 60-40. And how about this draw? One of the most overvalued draws. And I see it with tournament players all the time. The 2 overs and a flush draw. 2 overs and a flush draw versus a set, you are a 3-1 dog. 2 overs and a flush draw versus 2-pair, you're a 2-1 dog. Say you lead out with ace queen of clubs on that board now and an 8-7 deuce with 2 clubs board, and a guy raises. Again, you have got to figure out if there's fold equity with a 3-bet. Or let's say you made a check raise and now he 3-bets. It's not just a shove, especially with overs and a flush draw. Your overs are no good. That guy is not raising you with just 1 pair there. Normal competition is not going to raise you, or normal competition is not going to 3-bet your check raise there. So you really, really have to consider if you're going to lead and get raised calling. And I don't have a big problem with it. If you lead out with a draw as a semi-bluff and a guy raises you, and you know he's got more than 1 pair, and you know that there's no fold equity if you push back, then there's nothing wrong with calling. There is nothing wrong with calling. And, if you had like one of those 12-out draws, like a flush draw and a gut shot, or a flush draw and an open-ended straight draw, I think you should plan on check raising some turns, trying to figure out what card comes that's hidden that you can check raise with. Like, let's say you're a gut shot. The board is obviously draw heavy. You've let out with 4 or 5 of clubs on a 7-8 deuce board, so you've got a gut shot to a 6. And now the 6 comes. Maybe you want to check raise there, although the guy might get scared with 9-10. If you make your flush on the turn, I think you need to be leading into the better. If you're going to play it as a bet, get raised out in the field by a guy with a 2-pair plus hand, and you're just going to call because you don't think there's fold equity going over the top. If you hit your obvious draw, I think you need to be leading into the turn. I think it's a mistake. Don't let the guy check behind for pot control. Don't let him check behind to try to fill up. You got to lead right at him, and no one ever believes you. Even in the days where the games are getting tougher, if you lead in there when that flush card hits, he's going to call, and you know where he's at in the hand. You bet for value at the end if the board doesn't pair up. But I just see these guys. Actually, I think I saw it. I've seen it recently a lot. I saw it at Commerce. I saw it in Australia. That they'll just, the board comes out, and this is kind of the opposite way, but it actually makes it more obvious. The board comes out 9-4-3 with 2 hearts. You've raised it pre-flop on the cutoff with ace king of hearts, and there's 5-way action. 9-4-3. It gets checked to you. You bet the flop, and this guy that you haven't seen, you bet your flop with your flush draw and your overs, and this guy who you haven't seen play a hand in 30 minutes makes a check raise out of the blind. And you snap shove all in. Well, I've got overs and a flush draw. Buddy, your overs are no good. And I saw it like 3 or 4 times. Your overs are no good. You have no fold equity against a tight guy that's taking a check raise on the flop line. When is this guy ever going to check raise, especially if he's playing passive with one pair on that flop? He's check raising, he's going to stack off, and the proper play is either to call or to fold. If you don't think he's going to pay you off if the flush hits, then fold, or you don't want to get involved if the board pairs up and your flush comes in when you're up against a boat, then fold. But the snap ship is the worst thing to do. There is no fold equity. And I've kind of gone on a little bit of a rant, but how aggressively should you play your draws? Play it so that you properly have fold equity as a semi-bluff. That's how aggressively you should play your draws. And any way else where you're just shoving your chips in the middle when there's no fold equity is just spewing. I just went over the stats. Even if you have a 15-out draw, you're only 50-50 against top two, 60-40 against a set. And those other draws, your 12-out draws, you're more of a dog, and that commonly misunderstood overs and the nut flush draw, even more of a dog. 3-1 against a set, 2-1 against two pair. Again, don't overplay these draws. You've got to figure out what your opponent has, and is there fold equity in making a third bet or making a check raise, and so on and so on. I hope that helps you. Thank you very, very much for the voicemail. Another email here comes from Anthony Marichoni. He says, Bart, can you talk more about the rake in live games and the impact it has on a game and the year-end result of your bottom line? Well, thank you very much for your comments, Anthony. I think I talked a little bit about this in an earlier episode. It's really tough, I think, especially the way that California works, to beat lower stakes, no limit games with the rake structure. And I'll give you an example. At the bike, there's a $200 capped game where the blinds are $3 and $5. So you get 40 big blinds. They take $4 out of every pot. It's not a percentage. When you see a flop, it's $4 plus one for the bad beat jackpot. So they're taking $5 out of every pot. If you see 30 hands on average, they're taking $150 from that game. Everybody starts with a $200 stack. If you play for 10 hours, they've taken 75% of the money off the table. They've taken $1,500, or actually off of a 9-handed table, even more than that. They start with $1,800, 9 times 200, and they've taken $1,500 off the table. So the rake at lower games, it drastically affects your ROE. To the point where I said, a few weeks ago, I don't even know if those games can be beat. I've gotten some emails from people saying that the games are so loose that they can be beat. That might be the case. But all you really have to do, if you're playing in a raked game, to find this answer, to try to find out what the rake is against your bottom line, figure out the rake and figure out how many pots you're winning per hour. If, let's say, it's 3 or 4, let's be a little conservative and say 4. If I'm playing 5-10 no limit at the bike and they're taking a $5 rake, I'm paying them anywhere from 15 to 20 hours to play. If my hourly is $100 an hour, which is a pretty good hourly in that game, the rake is basically, it's little under 15 or 20% of what I make. So if you were to take the rake out and I was making 100, I would actually be making 120. So it's like 1/6 of the money I make, a little under 20%. So you can do that, for any game. Same thing with the time collection too at Commerce, 10-20 no limit time collection. It's $10 an hour, $10 per half hour, $20 per hour. It's kind of just about the same thing. A rake will favor a tighter player because you're winning less pots. Time collection will favor a looser player because you don't have to pay as much rake because you're winning more pots, and it's a flat fee. It was interesting. I've been experimenting a little bit with 6 max no limit online, just here and there and dabbling. And I was looking at my poker tracker stats, and man, it seems like at 50 cent $1, if you can beat that game at 4 or 5 poker tracker big bets per 100. You're paying almost as much in rake. It almost looks like I'm paying as much in rake as I'm winning. I'm even going to flip to it right here. The rake absolutely has a huge effect on your bottom line. Look at this. I'm looking at my full tilt stats just from 2 days ago through 2 days. I played 25 cent, 50 cent. No limit on full tilt poker. And I'm actually playing these no limit games just to kind of sharpen my board texture skills. Not really to make any money. Kind of trying to sharpen, where I'm at in hands and continuation bet experimenting. But anyway, so I played 1,276 hands in the last 2 days of 25 cent, 50 cent on full tilt. And I made $129, which was 10 Poker Tracker big bets per 100. And the rake was $60. Almost half of my profit was eaten by rake. Huge effects on bottom line. But again, it's kind of a simple equation, but it's definitely has to be figured in. And if any of you are playing, in a lot of home games and private games, you got to figure out how much they're taking, because, if they're taking something like 10% up to a $30 cap, I don't care how good the game is. If they're taking $30 out of every pot, there's just no way that game's going to be beatable. So just try to figure out, are you playing poker for fun, or do you actually want to make some money? Has to do with game selection, and again, normally with casinos, there's kind of a standard rate because they're all competing. But in private games, if you start giving away, double-digit money for every pot, you're never going to win. Thank you for that email, Anthony. Got an email here from Steve in Oakland. He says, first off, I think you have a great show going. In the past week's show, I was surprised in all the talk about getting up from the table and emotional tilt management and that you guys didn't mention Tommy Angelo, especially since you mentioned Lucky Chances in Bay Area poker. He talks about all those issues with great emphasis in his book, Elements of Poker. Definitely would have been relevant to the conversation, a great source for this aspect of poker. Anyways, great show. Keep up the good work. Steve, again, Steve in Oakland. Well, Steve, I haven't read that book, but I wanted to bring that up because bring it out onto the show, and I will definitely look into that. So that Elements of Poker, if anybody wants to, to continue on the kind of poker psychology, getting up from the table, emotional tilt management that we talked about, Joe McLean and I last week, check that out. Got a question here from Chris. He says, hey, Bart, my question is about opening my game up. I've been killing the baby stakes 1-2 no limit games at card rooms in the big city I live in. The games are filled with bad players, and raised pots are almost always multi-way, sometimes 5 or 6 handed. I've had good success with a straightforward strategy of playing big hands pre-flop hard, but also playing any 2 cards in limp pots because I will almost always get paid off when I flop something tricky. My bankroll will be healthy enough to step up to 2-5 no limit in the near future, but I know the games won't be quite as easy at that level. I won't make much money playing as straightforwardly as I do in 1-2 games. I need to add some more trickery to my game, and was wondering if you can suggest any good exercises to practice with. I have heard of lots of different ones, such as trying to win every hand without looking at my cards, never calling a bet pre-flop, etc. I'm looking for exercises that can be applied in a full ring live game. Thanks for your advice. Again, cheers, Chris. Chris, thanks for the email, buddy. One of the most interesting ones that we've gotten on the show. I have to tell you, man, you are going about it, in my humble opinion, the wrong way. If you are moving up from 1-2 no limit to 2-5 no limit, no trickery is needed. You should not be looking for exercises to try to figure out how to change your lines. You should be looking to play in a way that extracts maximum value with your good hands at that level. You don't need to play trickery at the levels that I play up to 10-20 no limit. You only need to maybe start, really doing some out of the water stuff, maybe at 20-40 no limit. Don't play blind. Don't try to look for exercises that teach you, floating. Don't float at these games. Don't call with any 2 and just raise any flop. It's just not profitable. If you're being 1-2 playing straightforward, you're going to beat 2-5 straightforward. You know what? You're going to beat 5-5 straightforward. You're going to beat 5-10 straightforward. It's about poker fundamentals. You don't need to add any trickery to your game, to have an edge at that level. And, I'm sorry if it sounds like killing the romanticism of high limit poker, but concentrate on good solid play and your talent level, and you will do fine. And thank you very much for that email, Chris. Another one comes here from Danny Harris. He says, hey, Bart, I have a big problem as far as cash games go. A problem that's left me stuck countless times. It's being when I'm up a large amount of money, I can't talk myself into leaving the table if it's soft. I continually give myself reasons to leave, but I can't bring myself to doing it. Knowing that I could make more off soft players. Is there any advice that you could give me on this subject? Danny Harris. And this is, once again, kind of a psychology issue. Now, Danny, I think that this is unique for every single person, because in my case, I think you should stay at the table. If I were in your shoes, I would be staying in a game that I'm winning in where the players are soft. I don't consider that a leak. Now, you have to look at your own game and figure out, well, when I'm winning, when I get to a certain point and I'm up several buy-ins, do I start to play worse? Because if the answer to that is yes, then this all goes back to that issue that Joe and I talked about last week. You are not putting in quality, good EV hours, and it's because of the later hours of your session. You're winning, and you've put in good EV hours when you're winning, but you reach a certain point where maybe the money, you just feel like you need to play looser because the money doesn't matter because you're up money. And now you're not playing optimally. Because normally, if you're in a good game with soft players, you want to stay in that game. So I really don't know why you would be losing money routinely most of the time in that situation. Again, I know guys that actually buy in short so that when they get deep, they're winning so that they play better. Because when you talk about playing marathon sessions, it's usually when the game is good. You don't want to be chasing your losses when you're stuck. But if the game is good, there's really no, and you feel that you're playing well, there's really no reason to get up. So I think this might be an internal leak with you, Danny, where when you're up for something, some switch in your head says, well, I'm gonna play and I'm gonna splash around here. That's really what needs to be addressed. And if you can't address that, then yeah, you need to get up. But I don't think the leak is once you're up money, everyone needs to get up when they're up money and book a win. No, the leak is when you're up, something is going off in your head that makes you play negative EV hours, and that's really the issue that needs to be addressed, Danny. And that's probably going to do it here for this week. I want to thank everybody for the emails. Again, we had a ton of emails, and please email in your questions for Brian Townsend. cashplays@pokerroad.com. Hopefully we're going to knock that out next week, and it is going to be a legendary show, I'm sure. So until then, we will see you next time. I'm Bart Hanson. Have a good week.